Okay, and welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Kashana. I am a member of the Leadership and Education team for Benicia Black Lives Matter. Today we are hosting this forum, How Dare You? It is a call for a recent incident that happened at one of our local elementary schools. At one of our local elementary schools, we have the DARE program that was presented by Benicia Police Department. It is not uncommon for them to give presentation on the DARE program. At this particular presentation, a gift was given to students, a gift of a t-shirt with the DARE logo, which is a lion, with the thin blue line flag in the background. During this incident, it caused some stress and trauma to children at the school site, as well as some trauma at home. And there was a response from our community to have an open discussion and around this incident. We're going to have some speakers today on our panel. We are going to first introduce one of our founders of BBLM, Brandon Green, who's going to give you a framework, and then we'll go on with our program. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brandon, and just want to kind of like set the stage for the conversation a little bit. Benicia Black Lives Matter was founded after the death of George Floyd, which was incidents of police violence that prompted some of the largest simultaneous protests in American history. And those protests were situated around racial justice writ large, but specifically around police violence, around the ways in which police budgets are overblown, and how other services suffer. This was in line with years-long organizing and conversations around school discipline and how Black and Brown students are disproportionately suspended and pushed out of schools. These simultaneous protests bore a discussion about a racial reckoning, and that racial reckoning included obviously chants of Black Lives Matter, but also had counter chants and other things that are happening now. So some of those counter chants were White Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter. In direct response to the organizing for racial justice, the blue line flag, the thin blue line, which initially was supposed to be representative of people who support law enforcement, became a specific symbol in opposition to calls for racial justice. And so when you would see people marching, organizing, demonstrating, et cetera, you'd see counter protesters with this. It became such an issue that several different law enforcement agencies across the country sort of banned the use of the thin blue line as a symbol. This context is important because it sets the foundation not only for the social political context with which this conversation is operating under, it sets the foundation for what we have organized around. So for example, initially the city was sort of giving money to the police department to have officers at the schools. That was one of the first conversations that we had with the then chief of police, now city manager, around diverting that money. And so the fact that in Benicia, you have Benicia Black Lives Matter, you have a resolution that was passed to establish Juneteenth and to establish a equity officer and equity study. All of these things that have been happening in the social political context is important because it shows sort of either a lack of seriousness or a lack of attention to detail that this was even able to happen this particular day and age. And so we just want to set that framework because the incident that happened, which we'll get into more specifically, sort of flies in the face of that. And, despite all of the long-standing protests and calls for action that happened, We know that we are currently in a period of reckoning about the racial reckoning that was not, right? So there's been a lot of pullback on the things that people organized for, demonstrated for in the streets. And so we felt like it's imperative to have this discussion, not only about the specific impact of this incident, but what that looks like more broadly in the calls for racial justice that are happening in Benicia, in our schools, where currently you have right-wing folks and others sort of using critical race theory and other, again, sort of calls for equity, calls for racial justice as frameworks to oppose all the work that's been done up to this point. So we are happy that you've joined us for this conversation, and hopefully it'll be powerful and informative. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brandon. If you guys looked at the chat, Nancy posted some housekeeping rules. I want to make sure I touch on that as we get more into our speakers. I want to make sure everyone knows this is a safe space. We hold value to everyone's lived experiences. We know this is going to be a tough conversation, and that there may be difference of opinions, but we will not allow devaluing or degrading of anyone's lived experience in this space. So please be respectful. Please be respectful to our speakers. No insults, or you will be removed from the forum. Please keep yourself on mute as well. And if you have questions, put them in the chat. Please try to make them concise. Our next speaker is a parent that is local, who has children in the Benicia Unified School District. And we're going to welcome her to speak. Saida.
Hello, thank you guys for having me. My name is Saida. I have children in the Benicia district. I also have previous 12 years of working in law enforcement at a local police department in the Bay Area. And when this incident happened, my kids were not directly involved, but the conversations that were going around about it. So with me still having dealings with my police officer friends, sergeants, lieutenants, captains, there are a lot of police who do not back Blue Lives Matter. The reason why they're unable to say anything is because being a police officer, you're held to a different, higher standard, and the political aspect of it, they can't say anything. But in hindsight, the people who are with Blue Lives Matter can say something without any repercussions. And so that's caused a problem amongst a lot of police officers in the Bay Area, police officers of color, police officers that are not of color, that do not stand behind the Blue Lives Matter. When the Blue Lives Matter, once again, with the George Floyd thing came about, after George Floyd, it caused a lot of controversy. It caused a lot of fear. And like I said, me just being a parent in this district, I think that we need to come up with resolutions on how this cannot happen again. And also there are other ways to mend that gap between civilians and police officers without having to have the DARE project. We need to have more things that are gender neutral, that are persons of color neutral, and also unbiased. My opinion of the DARE project, some of the things that they have said to the students as far as not being able or telling on your parents if they smoke weed when Benicia just opened a dispensary, is beyond me. How do you tell a child to go tell on their parent when some of the people that are in police management, they're the ones that were able to okay the dispensaries being there? So it's a contradiction. It's causing a lot of confusion amongst the kids. You know, what happens behind people's closed doors, as long as, you know, it's not, I might be putting my foot in my mouth, becoming a problem in the community. I don't feel as though they have the right to tell a child without a parent being present what they need to do in that aspect when it comes to drugs. The DARE project, from my understanding, I have a lot of friends in education in both the Fairfield Unified School District, West Contra Costa County, Pittsburgh, and DARE isn't even a fact anymore. There are so many other programs that we can bring to Benicia schools as far as equity, as far as mental health. And me personally, I think the DARE project needs to vanish. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Saida. Having lived experiences in this community, being able to convey that is wonderful. And we thank you for being here and sharing with us. I am going to read a letter from a parent who cannot be here today, but she sent her thoughts. This is written by Laura Cohen and her husband, Jesse, and I will read it on their behalf. It says, "We are the parents of 2 children who attend Robert Semple Elementary School. Our daughter, Anaya, is 7 years old and in 1st grade, and our son, Jackson, is 9 years old and is in 4th grade. I am from Stockton, California, and my husband, Jesse, is from Massachusetts. As it has been more than a month since the harmful incident occurred at our Semple campus, it has allowed both my husband and I time to process this experience, and we are grateful for the opportunity your platform is giving us to speak our truth and represent our family lens, how this incident was harmful to our family. In reflecting and processing the harmful event that occurred for me as a parent and my children on their school campus 4 weeks ago, it is important that I voice my life lens. I am Jewish, and I grew up in Stockton, California, and my sisters and I often represented the only Jewish lens at our schools. Within our circle of friends and in our community, being judged for who you are, where you came from, and what you represent is excruciatingly painful. Growing up in Stockton was also the greatest gift in that I was surrounded by lenses that were so different from my own, so many different cultures, so many different perspectives and life lenses, so much poverty, so many interesting traditions being celebrated. The incidents involving our Benicia Police Department handing out their t-shirts with the logo representing a thin blue line encapsulates the harm that can happen in our community when there is a lack of representation of lenses and leadership. To our family, the thin blue line has been paired with and associated with hate towards my Jewish heritage. It has been waved in tandem with neo-Nazi and white supremacist groups. These DARE t-shirts with the logo representing the thin blue line that was passed out by our Benicia Police Department represents hate and divisiveness for our family. We understand that this logo represents other things to other people. In my role as the Equity and Inclusion Co-Chair Board member of our PTG, I have had the opportunity to engage in many conversations that encompasses different lenses that respect a multitude of different perspectives regarding this incident, which I am grateful for. I have listened to the lenses of families that are upset and frustrated that the thin blue line has been corrupted and taken over by the hateful parties. I have listened to the lenses of families who feel that the blue line is a symbol strictly to honor the service of law enforcement. The fact that the symbol represents different things to different parts of our community, including some harmful and painful, should have prevented our leadership from allowing these shirts to be handed out to our children. Our leadership must strive to honor all lenses of our community, and when harm is caused by our leadership, it must be recognized, acknowledged, and accounted for to the entire community. What we want most for our community, especially those in leadership, is to have the courage to enter spaces, enter conversations, where we are all given the opportunity to just sit and listen to the life lenses of others, sit and absorb the life experiences that someone else has had that is different from our own. What we want most for our children to feel seen and heard, to feel that their voice and their life lens is valued, is respected, and that it belongs here. When these things are happening, an incident like this is less likely to occur. And when it does, then we respond as a community and do what is needed to repair the harm and make it as right as possible. I would like to thank Laura for sending in her response and being vulnerable and speaking about her experiences in her home about this incident. We are going to switch gears to a slideshow presented by our very own Matt and Jen. It is on the Thin Blue Line and the DARE project. So Matt and Jen, take it away. Thank you.
Hello. So the thin blue line in the classroom. This is going to be an opportunity for truth, education, and reconciliation. And
I can't find it.
It's okay. And a safe space for those impacted by recent events. There's a content warning. The slideshow will feature traumatizing images and controversial symbols that are linked to painful histories. So here we have the previous DARE logos that we're all sort of familiar with. And then here is a new iteration of the DARE logo. Question mark 2018, because Chief Green says that they ordered them for the 2018-2019 school year. And I'm not really sure if this is their new logo or if they're trying to make this new logo, but 2018 seems to be the date that we know for sure that these were in existence. So let's talk about the thin blue line history. So we have two eras and two different flags. We have the original thin blue line flag, which is just a black flag with a horizontal blue stripe going across the center. And then we have this new iteration of the thin blue line flag, which is a black and white American flag with the blue stripe across the center. So the original flag actually is a British, it comes from a British term. They called it the thin red line, and it referred to their red military uniforms. And this was in the 19th century. Americans adopted it and repurposed it, calling it the thin blue line, regarding their blue military uniforms. And by the 20s, it became associated with law enforcement. And its meaning was a support for law enforcement. And the history of law enforcement is a whole nother slideshow on its own. But the visual was simply this image right here. It was a black flag with a horizontal blue stripe across the center. So how did we get from this flag to this flag? And what is the significance of 2014? I'm glad you asked. Eric Garner was murdered by New York police, and his murderer was acquitted. Michael Brown was murdered by Missouri police, and his murderer was acquitted. Ferguson, Missouri protests initiated discussion on police brutality. Tamir Rice was murdered by Ohio police, and his murderer was also acquitted. All of this only 1 year after Trayvon Martin's murderer was also acquitted. All of this happened in 2014, and these were just the headlines. This flag was created by a white man in college in direct opposition to these murders. He found the outcry of police brutality distasteful. And this creates creating this flag in opposition to these it creates a direct opposition to the worth of Black civilians, and it creates a lack of concern for accountability of those who are supposed to serve and protect. So the creation of the flag itself is anti-Black. It was born in the wake of these murders of these Black civilians. And since 2014, this new iteration of the flag consistently appears in opposition to African Americans' lives. Figure 1 is the Unite the Right rally. This is in 2017. The Unite the Right rally was against the removal of a Confederate statue. And you can see the what is referred to as the Blue Lives Matter flag. That is the thin blue line flag with the American black and white flag. We have Nazi symbols. We have Confederate flags. We have a flag called Vanguard America, which is a white supremacist and anti-multicultural group. We have Identity Evropa, also known as American Identity Movement, which focuses on the preservation of white American culture, racism, anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial, and homophobia. And that's the blue one with the with the lines on it. Figure 2, the Cincinnati, Ohio Police Department raised this flag less than a week after the murder of George Floyd in 2020. And this was amidst all of the protests that were happening globally. And really quick, I'd like to show you a map. This is an interactive map. It's on Wikipedia. It's an interactive map of all the countries that that were protesting amidst the George Floyd murder. All right. It was eventually removed after protest against this particular flag. And here is this is just horrible. This is absolutely appalling. This is a reenactment of the murder of George Floyd. And we have a corrections officer and a FedEx worker. And here you can see the flag in the back of this as well. And then last, we have the January 6th insurrection, and the flag is being shown here. And I just want to quickly go over other flags that were also, or symbols that were also at the insurrection. We have this, the green flag up in the top left corner is the Kyrgyzstan flag. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but it is a Nazi-derived flag. We have the Confederate flag, which is a support for slavery flag. The Oath Keepers, they are anti-government. We have the 3 Percenters, which is anti-government. And then, of course, the Blue Lives Matter flag. The Thin Blue Line USA business that was created by the person who created this flag, he sells these on his website. And what's significant about the Punisher logo is I actually wasn't sure, I actually didn't know this until I researched it, but the Punisher logo is significant because he is an anti-hero who believes that murdering, kidnapping, and violence is a just form of punishment for criminals. And so anybody waving this flag is aligned with this ideology. So on the left, we have the Unite the Right rally in August 2017. On the right, we have the Dare Thin Blue Line t-shirt that was ordered 2018 and 2019. However, Chief Green said that the t-shirts were ordered during the 2018-19 school year and, quote, at the time, the Thin Blue Line design had a much different meaning. I don't understand where he got that from, because to me, it's always just been anti-Black. The decision to ban. Many police departments in the United States have decided to ban the Thin Blue Line from their departments. In Chicago, I have a quote. It says, "Mount Prospect does not exist in a vacuum. We are influenced by events and actions outside of our town. When our symbol meanings change, we must adapt to better serve our customers, all of the people of Mount Prospect." And then in Wisconsin, Chief Roman says that it's been co-opted by extremists with hateful ideologies. The San Francisco Police Department stands for safety with respect for all. Thin Blue Line masks shall not be worn by our on-duty members. And then we have 4 cities in Connecticut that have also banned the Thin Blue Line flag from their police departments. And so I want to speak a little bit about the parallels of this. The swastika was originally a Sanskrit word that means well-being, and it's a sign of good luck. The symbol represents Eastern religions such as Buddhism and Hinduism. It's often a map marking to locate temples. And before World War II, American companies used the symbol for their own marketing. There's a Coca-Cola bottle cap remover. There's a deck of cards. There's an ad. Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. U.S. military war in the First World War had them on their own weapons or military, whatever they used it for. And then after World War II, they all did away with the symbol because we all know what it means to us now. And so many countries have banned the flag. And even Japan has discussed whether or not to remove the icons from their maps because they understand how hurtful it is to other people, which is sad that they've had to do that, but good for them that they recognize that unfortunately this symbol was hijacked and it no longer represents what they believe it represents. And so that's it for the thin blind in the classroom. It's to me, it's always been anti-Black, and it should not be anywhere near our children. That's what I think. And I'm going to pass this over to Matt, and he's going to discuss, sources. Don't forget sources. And he is going to discuss the DARE program.
Hello all, and we're shuffling around. Okay. The DARE program. In the 1980s, we began a new or elevated the war on drugs with the election of Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan's Just Say No campaign. The DARE program was created by Daryl Gates, who was then the LAPD police chief, and Harry Handler, the superintendent of the Los Angeles USD. It was created in 1983, and at the height of its usage, the DARE program reached 75% of schools. I've read numbers saying upwards of 75 or above 75. I just felt like that would be the easiest one. Here we have a visual representation of a study talking about how DARE is in 75% of our schools. And one study found that 29% of DARE graduates were more likely to experiment with drugs than kids who did not participate in the DARE education program. There's been 3 different iterations of the DARE program. I believe the first one was called Project DARE, and there's been at least 30 studies on the efficacy of the DARE program. And when I say efficacy, I mean its ability to help kids or to prevent drug use. So at least 30 studies have proven the inefficacy of DARE. At one point, DARE lost its governmental funding because of its ineffectiveness. And this was something that was said by the Surgeon General in 2001. The National Institute of Justice rated the DARE program not effective. So then DARE adopted a new program called Take Charge of Your Life. This was a more interactive program. And during the use of this program, which I think only lasted 7 years, maybe a little bit more, they noticed in studies that kids were having greater use of alcohol and cigarettes, and they did more binge drinking among students. Our current iteration, which is the one I'm assuming, I haven't taken this DARE program, but this is the one I'm assuming we're using in Benicia, is called Keeping It Real. Which, pardon me, I forgot what REAL stands for. It's refuse, make an excuse. I forget what the A is, and L is leave. The Department of Justice required that drug abuse programs have an evidence basis in order to be used or in order to get governmental funding. So the DARE program adopted this program, Keeping It Real, and then what someone called DAREified it, and it has an evidence-based label. I would like to point out that the label of evidence-based is derived from a study done by the creators of the program. The substance abuse and Mental Health Services Administration gave DARE, the Keeping It Real program, a 1.5 out of 4 rating for readiness for dissemination. Oh, thanks, Jen. Real: refuse, explain, avoid, and leave. All right. So the National Institute of Justice commissioned RTI, or the Research Triangle Institute, to do a study. In that study, RTI found that DARE has little to no impact on students' drug use. This did not sit over well with DARE. So I found a report from the LA Times. According to the minutes of an internal meeting obtained by the New Republic, DARE America Executive Director Glenn Levitt reported that his organization spent $41,000 to try to prevent widespread distribution of the RTI report and started legal action aimed at squelching the study. I've also found that people who were presented themselves as against DARE often lost their jobs or had a hard time finding work, especially people doing studies. And then parents who didn't want their kids to participate in DARE or wanted to learn what DARE was doing often received threatening emails, phone calls, and whatnot. Even 2 of them were from police officers or people saying they were police officers. So keeping it real isn't keeping it real. The Truth in DARE study of 2015 says, however, we can conclude that the evidence basis for DARE version of KIR is weak, and there may be substantial reason to believe that KIR DARE may not be suited for nationwide implementation. Here's our study we talked about earlier from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, where they gave DARE Keeping It Real a 1.5 out of 4 rating for its readiness for dissemination. If you'll notice, training and support they gave 0.5, and quality assurance they gave 0.5. Another study, the social construction of, quote, evidence-based drug prevention programs by Dennis Gorman in 2009, he says, however, our reanalysis of the data suggests that what differentiates DARE from many of the programs on evidence-based lists might not be the actual intervention or its ability to keep kids from using drugs, but rather the manner in which the data analysis is conducted, reported, and interpreted. During a study by the Southwest Regional Laboratory, which I'd also like to point out, this man who led the study lost his job after doing the study, called In Their Own Voices, where he interviewed students and teachers. Students told teachers, or researchers, pardon me, that instead of helping kids with drug problems, school officials often suspend or expel them. And youths saw contradictions between the no use message they heard in the classroom and what they saw around them, such as family members who drink wine with dinner or friends who smoke a joint on the weekend and seemingly suffer no ill effects. Here's another quote that the kids had to say. They lie to you so you won't do drugs, one youth told an interviewer. They think you're dumb, said another. Do you think that works? Asked the interviewer. No. So we can see here that DARE seems to underestimate kids' ability to know what's going on or pay attention to what's going on around them. Via our City of Benicia website, we learned that each police officer who teaches the DARE program completes an 80-hour course involving child development, classroom management, teaching techniques, and communication skills. Someone, such as a substance abuse counselor, who would be appropriate for teaching kids about substance abuse issues, is required a minimum of 21 semester hours of addiction-specific coursework, plus 250 hours of intern experience. Or if you look over here at the bottom right, even just being a teacher's assistant is a minimum, or most are asking for a minimum 2-year college degree, which is estimated to be 768 hours plus the additional training. But even if that doesn't get you, let's look at a manicurist. In order to just take the state board examination, a manicurist requires 400 hours of experience. So our police officers teaching our kids have 80 hours, an 80-hour course. This does not make them qualified to teach kids about drugs, in at least my opinion. Via the DARE website, they say that DARE is the bridge to building trust and positive community police relations. The proceedings of National Academy of Sciences noticed that in their study that Black and white kids differ in how they're disciplined and what type of disciplinary action they receive. If you'll notice, school arrests, Black kids are 3 times as likely to be arrested at school than their white counterparts. Or law enforcement referral. Again, Black kids are 3 times more likely than their white counterparts to be referred to law enforcement. Either Black kids are just bad kids, or we have a bias or racism happening in our schools. This quote from this study says, Black students in the United States are subject to disciplinary action at rates much higher than their white counterparts. These disciplinary actions put students at higher risk for negative life outcomes, including involvement in the criminal justice system. Here's a story about a 3rd grader. A school safety officer removed a 3rd grader from class, took him to a staff bathroom, closed the door and berated him, telling the frightened child, "Stop crying like a little girl." The child's crime was refusing to leave the art class after an argument with another student at their Northeast Philadelphia elementary school. Nationwide, Black boys are at the highest risk, 3 times as likely to be arrested at school as their white male peers. And African American girls fare little better. They are more than 1.5 times as likely as white boys to be arrested via that analysis. And in this study, researchers found that 60% or more of Black students in the district did not believe that school police were trustworthy or cared about them. 45% disagreed or strongly disagreed that police made them feel safer on campus. 73% found that 73% found police overly aggressive, and 67% said they tended to escalate situations rather than calming them down. So I'm having trouble seeing how DARE is helping build bridge with community trust if the DARE program doesn't keep kids off drugs, which all the studies are showing, and the police officers in the class have caused fear and mistrust. Why are we continuing with this program? Here's my sources. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matt and Jen, for that presentation. It was wonderful, very informative. Next, we're going to have 2 wonderful speakers that agreed to be on our panelists, Mariana Moore and Andreas Soto. Mariana, I would like you to please give an introduction of yourself and your time and the community, and then we'll go ahead and go into some panelist questions.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me today. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mariana, and I have lived in Benicia for 40-something years. So I've seen a lot of change in this community, and I've seen some things not change that I wish would. My family's experience with DARE began 35 years ago. I'm a mother and now grandmother of kids that have gone and are now going through the Benicia school system, mostly with wonderful results. But I remember very clearly in 1987, in the Just Say No era, my daughter came home from kindergarten and she was crying. I said, "Why are you crying?" She said, "A police officer came to my school today and there was a meeting in the gym or the assembly room, and they talked about never taking drugs. And there was a police officer who was standing on the stage, and we all had to go up one by one and sign a poster in front of the whole school that promised we would never use drugs. And she said, I was really scared. And everyone was signing and everyone was quiet. And I felt like I had to sign. And this police officer was standing right there, and he had a uniform, and I was scared. And so we talked that day about a lot of things, but about dignity and choice and fairness and feelings is what I remember from 35 years ago very clearly. And I share that story because at the time, there was incredible social pressure on my 5-year-old, right, to go up and sign that poster. And I was furious. I went and talked to the principal about it. I don't remember if they changed anything, but they listened to at least my complaint. And so I've been very skeptical of the DARE program since almost its inception. And so when I heard about this incident at the school here in town with the thin blue line shirt, I just thought, oh my gosh, things have gotten worse and not better. And I was simply horrified. So I will stop there and then happy to answer any questions.
Yes, I'm going to follow that up. What, if anything, does a combination of the placement of symbols and the character of the DARE representation and mascot, what does that signify to you? We have the thin blue line, and then we have the DARE program in front. What does that symbolize to you, in your opinion?
Well, nothing good. I mean, when my daughter was, the 80s going through that program, it was a simple DARE in red. And I'd never heard of it. And so it was straightforward. And now to see it, conflated with, as, Matt and Jen went through that whole horrific story about anti-Blackness, about overt racism, and about this sort of connection of law enforcement, which has always had racist histories and legacies and current realities. But to make that so explicit and so like shameless. I mean, when I saw the picture of that t-shirt, and even worse, like they have this cute little lion, like cuddly lion. And then you have a racist symbol of how our country since its founding has oppressed folks with darker skin. It's absolutely horrifying. And I read the remarks by the police chief and the local media, and part of me is like, we can allow each other grace and we can learn. At the same time, honestly, it's like if you're in that position of so much authority and you walk around with a gun, like it is your job to understand that history and to understand the current reality and to, understand the harm, current and past, and to not take such a misstep.
Who do you feel, in your opinion, is the responsibility lies with this incident?
My grandkids don't go to the school in question, so I can't speak to those specifics of that decision making. I think for me, then just speaking in generalities, I think, I think the police chief and the city management absolutely bear responsibility. And perhaps it was not their intention to cause this harm. I can't speak to that. I don't know them, but they're certainly accountable for the impact. And they must be accountable publicly for that impact and show what they're going to change. And again, I think the school, and I don't know the teachers and principal there, even we credit them with good intent. That was a blind spot that's like a red flag, like, wow, do we, especially as white folks in these systems, need to understand the history and the current reality much, much better.
Thank you, Mariana. I am going to switch gears and I'll probably come back and ask you some more follow-up questions. Mr. Soto, Andreas, would you mind giving us a brief introduction of who you are and how you feel about this incident?
Sure, yeah, thank you, and thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm Andres Soto, and I grew up in Richmond, California all my life, and I moved to Benicia here in 2013. I had always come here because my mother lived here, and so I didn't really know the community till I got here. And it didn't take me long to realize that there was a lot of both undercover as well as overt racism. And then I came to know more about the schools and the city administration, and I saw the huge, big impact of Valero on the city's economy and politics. And I also saw the role of the Benicia Police Department or Police Association, the police union, and their foray into the local politics as well. And I was particularly shocked the year that there was the vote for the legalization of marijuana, full legalization. And 2 weeks before the vote, the BPOA and the school district co-sponsored an anti-marijuana motivational speaker from Florida to come out and do a big hoopty-doo community meeting at the gym, which was essentially illegal politicking against the marijuana legalization. So the politics of drug suppression within law enforcement, I think we just saw a clear demonstration of its history, but it also is pervasive here. And so as a grandparent of two grandchildren who are in this school district, I was originally shocked, but then I wasn't, that DARE is even in the school district. I mean, it was discredited so long ago, like in Richmond, it's been gone since the 1990s. And why would it still exist like a dinosaur in a place like Benicia? Well, because there is a white power structure here that does not want to change, does not like to see changes. And I think within the school district administration, when you're talking about culpability, it's school district policy that allows this to occur. So that's where the policy focal point needs to be, is the school board has to grapple with, why is this program even in our schools when we know it's a failure? Who's paying for the police to be there in those classrooms? They do not do anything for free, and they get paid big money. And so, and I think what was going on in the presentation, and I really appreciate the people who put that presentation together, was the history of DARE as part of a public relations program to support things like the school to prison pipeline and the broader prison industrial complex, is a sophisticated marketing tool that big law enforcement has the resources to engage in. And that's a question Benicia has to ask itself. Do we want these kind of right-wing propaganda efforts going on blatantly in our community? Our schools are supposed to be even playing fields. We do not allow religion in the classroom because there's not equality in religion. Why should we allow police over here when we don't have, as some have been suggesting, what is the mental health plan for the students of the Berkeley Unified School District? When I look at the demographics of this school district, I think the school district is really seriously at risk of the kind of suburban school shooting that we see happening all over the country. And why are we having some kind of conversation about guns within the community and putting those guns away, getting rid of guns, guns as a public health risk? So I think we need to turn the conversation, that this is really an example to turn that conversation to these more important substantive issues. But the first step is to get rid of DARE altogether out of the school district.
Thank you. I'm going to follow that up with a question. Do you believe the blue line symbol and the flag is political speech and a political statement?
Oh, absolutely. And it really has come out in prominence really since Charlottesville, and just here locally when they were doing the recall effort against Gavin Newsom. Down at Rookies, they strung up the blue line flag as a banner in every single window in the Rookies restaurant and bar. So, I really, yeah, ever since then, I boycotted the place, you know. So they're not doing it now, but they did it then. And it was a very political statement because they were also telling people to go there to pick up petitions to get signatures for the recall. So, without taking sides on the recall one way or another, the fact that they're using that as a political organizing tool to motivate right-wing people right here in Benicia. And we've seen the Trump flags in the trucks, during the old timers game. There's a guy out there in left field who has a truck and he had a Trump flag planted there. So, these guys are hiding in plain sight in our community. Yes, it is a political statement. And I think we should counter that whenever the opportunity presents itself.
I'm going to switch to asking both you guys some questions, but Andreas, who do you feel the responsibility lies with this incident?
Like I said earlier, I think it's a school district, but it's clearly a partnership between the police department, which is an agency of the city, and the school district. I don't know the original history of how it got started, but I do know how to take it apart. And that means focusing both on the school district and the city as partners in this, meaning the city council and the school board. They are ultimately responsible. And it's the administration who allowed this to continue. Now, the previous administrator, he's the guy who brought in the motivational speaker from Florida, the previous superintendent. He just retired. But now the new person is in there. So ultimately, this has been going on for a while. But if there's going to be a stop to this, there has to be a concerted campaign that focuses on those two bodies, the school board and the city council.
Do you, and this question is going to be for both Mariana and for Andreas, do you believe that there is some hypocrisy when it comes to our schools allowing so much trust and freedom with our local police department, opposed to any other organization that were to come in and try to do activities such as like Ruby Bridges Walk or something that would correspond to different ethnicities, ethnic groups? Do you think that too much freedom is given to the local police department? They have free reign? We'll go with Andreas to start off the conversation, and then Mariana.
Well, I'll let Mariana, I've been talking, let Mariana go first.
Thank you, Andres. I actually have a specific example of that. So my answer is yes. So I serve on the PTG of a local elementary school. And I went to the PTG with an idea of, it was last October when Halloween was coming up, about doing some education at the school around Halloween costumes and helping students and their parents become aware of what might be racially harmful, racially insensitive, or straight up racist. And the school, or the PTG members, I should say, were both sympathetic and said, but that's political, we can't do that, which I was very disappointed by. And I do think that's the other reaction, honestly, I had when I saw the DARE t-shirt. I thought, wow, they're doing this mass, and meanwhile, we can't talk to students about how to, respect the dignity of every student and every culture. So I just think it's a very crystal clear example of how different folks define political, to serve their own ends, and how the police seem to get a pass in this community. And I find that really deeply troubling.
Yeah, so I mean, on similar lines, it comes down to organizing and putting public pressure on elected officials about the policies that are allowed to occur in these public agencies. That's the one thing we can do. Private business, you can't do anything. Rookies, you can't do anything about that except, don't patronize them. But, for something like the school district, there really needs to be people coming together, petitions, getting parents concerned and community groups to say, look, this is not appropriate in 2022 to have something like a failed program like DARE that is only going to create more harm than good. And there needs to be, on the counterbalance, some kind of reckoning coming out of, because Benicia Black Lives Matter has been having these conversations to say, look, racism exists, it's a reality, it exists against a variety of people. There's also bullying, there's, all kind of social division, and it's part of living in today's society. It's what you do about it. And if you try to bury your head in the sand, you're not going to come to grips with it, and it's going to aggravate, and you're going to have tragedy. But if you get forward thinking and you create part of the curriculum as a required curriculum by the local school district, would be to have more understanding of greater cultures here in the United States. I mean, there's a range of cultures that need to be spoken about, because now we're getting blended cultures, and that's just part of that experience too. So I think it's stopping the bad, but we have to start working on building on the good.
How would you, and this is a question for both of you, how would you have liked the police chief or the police department to have responded? There was statements made in local newspaper. There was something sent to parents at the school. Would you have done something different or wanted something different from our local police chief and the response to this incident?
Go ahead, Mariana.
Thank you. Again, I want to speak only to my sphere of knowledge. I did read the local media coverage. I didn't see the parent statement. My kids go to a different school. I had a range of reactions, and I expressed, I think, where I landed earlier. I think at least the police chief was trying to take some accountability. I honestly have some skepticism with anyone in that kind of position of authority, not just for police, but anyone who has something to lose, professionally or personally, if they don't sort of put the best spin on what they've done. And that's also being human. But again, when there's so much at stake here, I look for deeper accountability than the chief displayed. And also, I'll assume for a moment, he's speaking with both good intent and speaking honestly. And if that's the case, he really needs to do some more learning. Instead of spending 80 hours in a DARE course, how about if the police spend 80 hours learning about the history of racism in this country? And Benicia is not exempted from that history. And we see evidence of it every day, especially local Black and Brown students and their families. So it's here, it's real. Let's not sidestep it. As Andres said, that's where I'd love to see true accountability and true corrective action happen. And it's painful. And as a white person, I've had to challenge myself and be challenged. That's the role of white folks in this, is to get smarter, go deeper, take accountability, do the work. And I don't think our police chief, again, I'll assume good intent for a moment. I don't know the man. Good intent isn't enough. You've got to know the history, and you've got to know it's not just history, it's happening now. And so if you know those things, what are you doing as the head of an entire department? And what is the city council doing? And what is the city manager doing to deeply understand the realities in this town and in this country? And I think the voters should hold them accountable, the city council that is, and then both for their own actions and for that of the police chief whom they hire and oversee.
Yeah, I would have to say that his response is what I would expect a chief of police to say in a community that still had a DARE program. He's not going to speak ill of the program because there's been no evaluation or discussion of evaluation of the program. That's a political position. And the lack of contrition, other than oops, those are the wrong ones, and it didn't mean then what it means now. That's like saying the Confederate flag didn't mean in the 1960s what it did in the 1860s, and so that just doesn't fly. And I think that Benicia has to ask itself, what sort of forum for police accountability does it want to create, if it wants to create one? Many communities are going through this. There are many models of civilian police accountability forums weak ones, strong ones, every in between ones. Um, we know that that it doesn't exist in the city of Benicia, and it doesn't exist in Solano County, even though it could in both. So that, may be further down the road, but this is really just the tip of the iceberg of the broader example of how law enforcement infuses itself into our institutions, particularly the students and the schools. And I think that's problematic.
We have a lot of things that kind of transpired when this incident happened. We have the police coming onto campus in tactical gear. We had imagery that was racist and traumatizing. And when we speak about experiences, how do we prioritize certain feelings, especially when it comes to harm and harm reduction? What would you suggest? We'll start with Mariana.
So I will start by talking about 35 years ago. So my daughter came home and was really scared of the police for years after that. And she's a little white girl who has much less culturally and historically to fear from the police than a little black girl or brown girl, right? So that's really indicative that she was, oh, there's a police, be careful, mommy, is what she said. I also want to share something personal that I think relevant. So she grew up to be a DARE failure. She had some trauma and she had some mental issues, and she ended up self-medicating. And she went through a lot, including incarceration and just much suffering. And when I would visit her at the jail, I would talk with her about all kinds of stuff. And there's lots of folks in there who didn't have family that they were still connected with. So I ended up talking to a lot of women in that facility, mostly Black and brown women, who shared their stories as well. And the harms experienced by those Black and brown women were so much deeper and scarring and whatever the opposite of dignity and kindness and justice, like it was all in that room. And so I just want to point up the deep and lasting harms. It's like, oh, it's a DARE program. Oh, it's police. Like, no, this is serious and it can impact generations. So we as a community and we as parents and we as families have got to see that no matter what the color of our skin, harm is being created and we're that solution to bring ourselves together instead of tearing us apart.
Yeah, and thank you for this question, because it is very profound, very deep. And I think, I'm trying to speak in relatively global terms here, is that we have to understand all of this war on drugs is a war against the American people. And it has a profound racist component to it. It certainly has a classist component to it. And so if we want to turn our society around from one that is built on the historic repression of America, this established with American colonialism and the genocide and slavery that built the wealth of this country, then the United States is really going to have to shift its priorities. There should be health clinics in the schools, not police officers in tactical gear. Our police should not even have tactical gear. Our schools should be gun free. Our communities should be gun free. And until we start working on those projects, these kind of issues, DARE just being an example, are going to continue to pop up. And so we really have to, we really have to choose which direction we want to go. And if it continues to be police state and, oppression and incarceration and court systems and all that money that is tied up in that, then we're going to get the same results time and time again. And until we reprioritize the wealth of this country and invest in the people of this country in a profoundly different way, we're going to make the same mistakes.
I would like to invite Brandon Green, our co-founder, to also speak on that question as well.
Um, I mean, I said this in the chat, but I mean, just as to the police chief's response, I just think it's devoid of any actual social and political context. So, you know, prior to becoming police chief, the previous police chief, again, now the city manager, you know, we met with him around these issues. We met with him around issues of school resource officers. We met with him and the mayor around the budget, right? And so there is not a lack of at least knowledge or awareness of these issues. You know, at the same time, you know, preceding this particular incident, you know, we've been organizing with the board of supervisors as it related to the 3%ers and other things, right? And the 3%er iconography and other things are directly related to the thin blue line iconography, right? So there's a social political context that both the police chief and other officials in city government are aware of. At the same time, we've been, you know, having conversations with the school district around curriculum. Again, school discipline has been an issue that disproportionately impacts Black and Brown kids. And what we know to be true, you know, across the board is that white people use drugs at the same rate, roughly, as Black folks, right? But the incarceration rates, the arrest rates don't show that. So even if you were to have some sort of programmatic thing about drug use, it would not make sense to have that particular conversation outside of the conversation about how, despite relatively equal numbers of drug use, you have disproportionate impact via incarceration, arrest, jail, suspension, et cetera, right? And so the actual issue is not one of use, it's the ramifications of use, which look different depending upon who you are. But we're not going to have that conversation that dovetails with any sort of like conversation about prevention. So if you can't have both sides of that conversation, you shouldn't be having it. And obviously the police wouldn't be the relevant party to have that. And so, you know, for me, both the response from the police and the response from the district, again, there's an issue of proximity, right? So, you know, our city leadership is not very diverse. Our school board leadership is not very diverse. Our board of supervisors leadership is not very diverse. And so their proximity to these issues is a real problem. It ends up sort of tainting their response. So yeah, like just saying, my bad isn't enough when the thin blue line actually like means something that is threatening to people, right? Like it's actual, it's not just a symbol of like intellectual or emotional harm. It's like actually a perceived symbol of like physical violence, right? That's why people don it at counter protest. And so to not have a response that's situated within the relevant social political context and how people receive that, and within the social political context of the school district itself and how it is failed to serve Black and Brown students and families, and how the police response to school resource officers, et cetera, have had disproportionate impact. So then when you have police come in riot gear, right? Like, you know, I used to, in the clinic I used to run at Berkeley, I used to ask my students how many of them have ever been pulled over. Since the majority of them were white students, most of them never raised their hand, right? We never even got to like, have you ever been in handcuffs or had guns pointed at you, right? But depending upon your experience, like my experience as a youth, right? If I saw police come to the school in riot gear, well, I used to be harassed by the gang unit all the time, right? So my proximity to that experience is going to be a lot different. So if you can't have that conversation with the relevant social political context, then it's a real issue. And so for me, almost, you know, silence would have been better than like a very, very surface level response that is not taking into consideration not only like the broader context, but the specific context with which we've been organizing around the conversations we've been having here, particularly around police issues. So, you know, there was a lot of outcry when they wanted to install the automatic license plate reader cameras, right? And we talked about surveillance and its disproportionate impact as well. And so from my vantage point, just it was a failure to grapple with why it's such an issue, right? And you can't just say, my bad. You actually have to have the conversation, have a response that's situated within the social political experience and the sort of like visceral experience of those who are really impacted. And it didn't have any of that. And that is a very real issue of the lack of diversity that we have in leadership and their proximity to these issues.
Thank you, Brandon. I have another question that was asked about the blanket statement that was basically put out that the chief shouldn't put out a big statement for the simple fact that some people liked the flag, they had no problem with the flag, and then some people did have an issue and it caused harm. Why is that a problem that he did not, why is that problematic that he did not address the community that was harmed? Do you feel like that could have been handled differently? And I'm going to ask that for both the police level as well as the district level. Mariana, would you like to go first?
I mean, I think I have addressed that. I don't have a lot more to add. I just want to reemphasize that anybody in positions of authority, I mean, really all of us in this town, say that, should have an understanding of what Brandon just described so beautifully and eloquently, right? The pain that's caused by not looking at the social and historical and political and current context, and looking at different impacts on Black and Brown students and families. So that's a start, like all of us educate ourselves. And then again, I think in particular for the police chief and others in positions of authority, we're not born maybe understanding, especially as white folks, like all of this history and culture and the harms that are done. It is our individual and collective responsibility as white folks and as everyone to build that understanding. And so if I believe that if leaders in this community and any community are not in that learning process, then they're failing as a leader, straight up, no excuses. And so we can walk with folks on that journey. We can resource that journey with knowledge, especially lived experience. But if folks at the top aren't curious about why things are happening and the patterns and why this is not new at all and just a different expression of the same old stuff. So I think, again, that we as voters and as parents in the school system must hold leaders accountable and hold ourselves and each other accountable every day. This is an everyday thing. This incident at that school was a thing that like floated up, but little micro harms happen every day. And we don't see them, especially we as white people. We have the privilege of being oblivious. So let's not do that. And let's say to our leaders, you can't do that. It is way past time to pay attention, way past time.
Andreas, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just a little bit. I mean, I think the response, like I was saying, it's not unexpected, but in the end, it's an insult. It's an insult to the community. It's an insult to the people who are harmed, you know, by its symbolism. And the failure to apologize shows an insensitivity, but I think it presents an opportunity for us to have a conversation with him to say, hey, look, this is the harm that does, and we want you to recognize that. And, you know, tell him that, you know, it's time to, you know, look at the DARE program and get rid of it, because it can't happen without the police department doing it in the schools. And similarly, the school board, you know, should adopt a unanimous resolution condemning that shirt, its symbolism, its presence on campus, and say that that will never happen again. And that, you know, there needs to be a process where, you know, these questions we've been talking about are then elevated and developed into a curriculum that can actually allow the young people to have, the students themselves have the conversations that we're having today.
Thank you so much, Andreas. That was actually going to be one of my last questions to ask is what more can our district and our school sites do to stop this from happening again? So I thank you for leading into that. We are going to shift into our next steps, and we have our wonderful Krista, who will be leading that off. Krista, would you like to give an introduction?
I would. Thank you, Kashana. Thank you so much for having me, all of you. I actually know a lot of people in this room already. I'm so grateful that I've been asked by Benicia Black Lives Matter to report out some next steps, some steps that have been taken from a grassroots parent level at Robert Semple is a lot of what I want to share with you today. And then I'm going to do my best to summarize some of the asks that we have as a BBLM group for our school district and our city leadership. If I can, looking at the time, am I okay to give some of my personal reflections?
You are more than welcome.
Okay. So I'd like to give some context to why I'm here and why I care about this. I am an actual Robert Semple parent. I have been up to my elbows, really, and up to my eyeballs in addressing this incident since it happened. I've lived in Benicia for 13 years. I am a parent of a 22-year-old who's out on the world now. He's working and going to college, lives on his own. But he attended Benicia Middle and Benicia High. I have two little ones who are currently fourth graders and second grader at Robert Semple. And like a lot of you who shared before, I grew up in a different community. I grew up in a place that was much more racially diverse than the one I live in here now in Benicia. I'm a proud member of Benicia Black Lives Matter. I serve on the board of a local nonprofit that addresses food insecurity in our community. I'm a hyper involved school volunteer. I serve on different school related councils and committees, and I'm currently the Robert Semple Site Council member, and I'm a board member for our Robert Semple PTG. I have not always been this involved in things like this. I always used to say I don't join groups like that because I don't cluck with the hens. It's just a bunch of clucking. But what I've learned is that if I want to really get some things done that matter to me, I sometimes do have to operate within the system. And so I do have to implant myself in these roles and these committees so that I can kind of see what's going on from within and then make a real impact. So personal reflections about this as a Robert Semple parent and who's someone who is on our PTG. So background is our parent teacher group is the only one within Benicia Unified right now that has an equity and inclusion chair position. And you know, our PTG changed our bylaws last year, and the process of doing that added in this position. And so I just want to say that in my role as an equity and inclusion core co-chair for our PTG, you know, I've had the opportunity over the last 4 weeks to engage in a lot of conversations with people. And those conversations have encompassed a lot of different perspectives that people have when they look at the thin blue line symbol. And for me, like, it's been all consuming, sometimes frustrating, saddening, and really sobering to hear the different views of this symbol in our community. I want to say that I'm not glad the incident occurred, but I want to acknowledge that the benefit of when incidents like this happen, it becomes a catalyst that for all of us to have a dialogue about things that our community really needs to be talking about, right, to address change. And so we can even have a forum like this, so we can get people to the table to have these discussions. Honestly, the whole concept of DARE still being in our school, if I'm being honest with you, was not on my radar. My oldest child is 22. My next child is now in 4th grade. It's like somebody else said before, it's like, I had no idea that Benicia was still using the DARE program. So it wasn't on my list of goals for the year to like address this and, oh, let's remove DARE from the school. Like that wasn't a part of my goal setting. But what happens is these things come up and we have to address them. We can't sweep it under the rug. We have to do something about it. So first I want to share just some reflections that, again, like I said, as a parent at the school and as a PTG member, on the day that the shirts went out, I am friends with one of the 5th grade parents who really put this out on social media and made some of us aware. I saw pictures of kids wearing this on campus. It was like secondhand knowledge for me, but I ended up having this really visceral reaction where I felt like anger and a sense of panic that some of our students and our families were at home now looking at these t-shirts and with the same kind of harmful interpretation that I see when I look at the thin blue line flag. And I was worried about the hearts and minds of students who are socially aware enough to know that like social political representation of that flag and how it might affect them if they see their fellow students wearing this around. I was worried about fellow parents who may already feel anxious about their child's safety at school, who would look at that shirt and wonder if it was an intentional message from someone at BPD or someone in the school district. And so since that first day, you know, lots of time has passed and we've heard explanations from our police chief saying that the shirt was an oversight and apologies about the lack of awareness, but there's still so much work to do. But I'm hopeful that we're going to actually get to a place of repair. One of the things I want to share out is in the last 4 weeks at Robert Temple, we have had advocated for by our PTG a number of what we call listening circles, where our parents and families and our school community, our principal has been there, and we've all had a chance to share with each other how we were affected by this, and then observations from that day. And one of the saddest things that I was made aware of was just reflections in people who were staffing that day, like yard duty folks who saw police walking across campus and their observations of students and how they reacted to police presence. So it not just being about those shirts, because the shirts was an issue, but also stories of a little girl crying and running into the arms of a yard duty person, watching police officers in their full gear with their weaponry, and that immediate reaction is, what's wrong? There's some, you know, the interpretation of somebody's in danger or the police are here to get somebody. And I think that's really important that we as a community recognize that and acknowledge that. I know that that's not this specific incident, this shirt incident, but I'm glad that this has been a catalyst for now future conversations about everything all of our speakers were talking about. Is we need to be having a dialogue and given the opportunity to discuss with our police department what community outreach looks like to them. I know what their goals are for community outreach, but I think as parents, we should be given the chance to give them feedback about what it is we need from them for community outreach, what our kids need from them when they're on campus with our students and are there to support our families. And they need to hear from us and they need to give us a space to do that. So since then, I also want to say that I continue to carry an immense amount of sadness about the lack of awareness that allowed these t-shirts to be passed out in the first place. You know, like I said, in the past 4 weeks, I've engaged in a lot of dialogue with fellow parents and school personnel. And at first, I felt really outraged because it seemed to me like you'd have to be just living under a rock completely, especially over the course of the past few years, to not have seen images of white nationalists flying thin blue line flags alongside swastika symbols or Confederate flags at rallies, or images of the thin blue line flag being carried by mobs of people who stormed our Capitol building on January 6th, last year, in an effort to stop the certification of election results to, upset the peaceful transition of presidential power in this country. Those images were super highly circulated. So to me, it would seem like you're living under a rock if you haven't seen this. And like Brandon said, there's so many ways in which our community should be aware of what that symbol means to a lot of us. And so I've had to do some reflection, right? Because I share this space with a lot of different people. And I feel like as a PTG member, I have to be conscious in representing our entire community. And I'm doing some reflection over, why is it that I have an awareness about what this flag means and other people who live in our community do not? So I can't speak for them and I can only speak for myself. And I think it's been, maybe as the daughter of a really dark-skinned Mexican man, you know, I've witnessed my whole life how he's been forced to interact with the world around us. My maiden name is Lowy. It's derived from Lowenstein. My family came through Ellis Island and had to change. My grandfather came through Ellis Island, had to change his last name. He was escaping the Nazis during the Holocaust. And sadness I feel over the loss of our heritage and traditions, because he felt forced to assimilate to, you know, this Americanized culture. And so maybe I am just hyper aware. If I see something fly next to a swastika flag, I'm going to pay attention to that. Maybe I have a higher awareness about symbols of hate. I certainly have to be aware of places and spaces, like where groups of people are wielding flags with certain symbols, that those places and spaces wouldn't be safe for certain members of my family, certainly not for my own son, who's a gay man. So to me, this just speaks to, I even have now a greater motivation to push our community to be intentional about having more diversity among our leadership, because we need people who have a variety of lived experiences to be truly reflective of our community that we serve. So to me, this is an even more, a larger call to action for that. So lastly, I just want to go back to, as a team, as a BBLM team, there are some asks that we want to give out to the community. And the first is to acknowledge, respond, and repair needing an apology from Chief Green, from Upton, who is our city manager, and from our school district. So I can report back on some of the progress with that. So sorry, I'm switching screens on a lot of this stuff and I'm reading a little bit from notes. So lots of parents, or some parents at Robert Semple, sent personal emails to our school site principal, our school board members, our school district leadership, expressing concern and asking what we need from them going forward. Our PTG drafted a letter that was signed by all of our board members that was sent to our school district leadership. And that letter asked for a meeting to be held between us, our school site principal, and Police Chief Green, so that we could express directly to him our concerns over this. We let them know and become aware that we as a PTG plan to hire a third-party organization called Circles for Social Change to facilitate some listening spaces for our own Robert Semple community, to really take some agency in our own healing and decide as a Robert Semple community how we wanted to come together and hear one another and address this going forward. So we have had that meeting. We've held some of our listening circles. We have had our meeting with our principal and our superintendent, assistant superintendent, our director of educational services, Stephanie Rice, along with Police Chief Green. And we, as a PTG, laid out what we thought would be effective protocol going forward for when incidents of harm happen. And I personally felt hopeful that our school district personnel listened to some of our suggestions. As far as our police chief goes, it was clear, he made it very clear that he has no intention of making a public statement any further about this Dare t-shirt incident, that he has no intention of making a community-wide apology for it. There's still a lot of work to do there. So as a community, I hope we continue to do that. I do want to commend our school site principal for being present for all of this and being willing to learn and to grow. And when we asked for her to make a statement, at first the statement only went out to fifth grade families, and that just wasn't enough because this affected our entire community. She then made a statement into our entire school community, and I thank her for that. But you know, when we asked our superintendent to do the same, it was only halfway. It was only a halfway explanation, in my opinion, and he still only sent that to Robert Semple. I believe he owes that to the entire school community. I would like to see every single parent and family and staff person have a personal statement from the school district about this incident. I feel the same, and so does the group of us. My PTG cohorts and fellow Robert Semple parents feel the same, that our school board owes our community a direct response about this incident that we still don't have. We need those things. Let me see what else is on our list of things because I want to make sure that I address them all. I also do want to commend our school site principal has embraced the concepts that we've introduced, which is listening circles. We are now doing that as a school community. Some of them have even been paid for by school district funds. You know, some of it was PTG supported, grassroots parent led. We did face some barriers there that we got through. It's just been growth, right? We're growing together, we're moving forward, we're learning together, but we really need the whole community to get involved and speak up, because I go to these meetings where I'm talking to district leadership officials, and I'm so sad to hear that sometimes their response is, well, I've only heard from you guys, or I've only heard from a handful of people, or I've only heard from, you know, they want to, they're numbers people, and they need to hear from more people in the community. So I would urge anyone in this room, even if you're not a Robert Semple, we know this is a whole city issue, right? This is a whole school district wide issue. Send your letters to our school district administrators. Send your letters to our school board members. Write your letters to Chief Green. Write your messages to our city council and our city leadership. They need to hear from us. We would, again, I didn't think that we'd end up here, but at the end of that meeting with Chief Green and our school district leadership, we discussed what we talked about in this forum today. So much learning. Thank you to everybody who put together that slideshow of information about the DARE program. We did ask for future meetings about programming, DARE programming in the schools and why we still have it, and reviewing programming about why we still have DARE in our schools, and advocating not to just continue to do things because that's the way we've always done it. Also acknowledging that the fact that the t-shirts went out and that DARE is in school at all is not solely the responsibility of Principal Moore and her staff. That's a district level collaboration. That's a district level thing. And also in the ask, the message that our superintendent sent out to us, to me, still hasn't completely repaired the situation, because has not yet specifically said that going forward, Benicia Unified School District administrators or somebody in the school district will have eyes on the DARE program and what DARE officers bring onto our campuses and what DARE officers plan to pass out to our children. And that it's clear that up until this point, there has been this blind level of trust between these two parties, Benicia Unified and Benicia PD, that whatever they bring is just fine because that's the way we've always done it. I really need assurances as a parent that going forward, because that trust has been broken, in my opinion. The police department broke that trust with Benicia Unified School District, and I no longer trust for them to bring materials into our classrooms or pass things out without having somebody in school administration having their eyes on it. So lastly, let me see, I'm reading from our list of demands, or asks. Oh, I want to say, so in the meantime, right, we all do this work on different levels. We do them from top down at, city level, administration level. We are hoping, we're advocating that our administrators look at the efficacy of DARE. We're asking if there are going to continue to be drug intervention programs on our school site, that they are administered by professionals, mental health professionals, social emotional support. This is not something that should be distributed by our police department. But also, excuse me, let me go back to my notes to say that in the meantime, I want parents or anybody in this room to know that in the meantime, all of us are working on this top-down approach of let's remove DARE from our schools for these reasons, that as parents, we still have power. That I was able to confirm directly with our police chief and our school site administrators that our children's participation in DARE is optional. It's not advertised to be optional, but it is. We can choose, we can say, I don't want my kids to do the DARE program, or I don't want my kids to be handed a shirt. I personally will be advocating for our school districts to make it not a burden on the family to know when the DARE program's coming in. I would like to see a permission slip, honestly, sent home so that parents are aware when DARE is coming. Because what I've heard from some families is they didn't even know their kids went to the DARE program until they came home with the t-shirt and the DARE program was already done. And so as a representative of their parents, I'm going to tell you, it's really hard to keep up with, even if like an email went home or whatever. We don't always know exactly what our kids are doing at school unless we have something that we, like for my kids, they say, what happened at school today? What was your favorite thing? Oh, lunch and recess, you know. So unless I know something specific to ask them about, it is realistic that I won't even know my kid had a DARE officer in their classroom if they forgot to tell me about it. If it wasn't meaningful to them, if it wasn't important to them that day, they're not going to share it with me. So I would advocate that our school district really owes it to us to give us an option. We do have the option, that they really owe it to us to inform us when it's happening so we can choose to say yes or no to the program. And then I'm sorry, because I'm just ranting on. I'm going to hand it over to either Kashana or Ms. Roz to follow up with the rest of our asks and community involvement.
Thank you so much, Krista. I think it's very important that we discuss our experiences with other people in our community. As a parent of 5 kids that have gone through this district and have gone through the DARE program, I can honestly say that I do not feel like it's appropriate for police officers to be teaching children that level of health education, because they do not have that level of education themselves. I've had the opportunity to be able to sit as a healthcare professional, sit with counselors as they ran different programs for those that have addiction problems or those that may have other problems in their lives. And the programs are ran completely different. But like I said, those are healthcare professionals. They have a lot more training and education when it comes to that type of explanation and teaching. There was a great question by Andres that said, why won't the superintendent communicate with the whole community? And that's a great question that I do not want to put words in our superintendent's mouth on why. I have my own opinions. I think we have this micro lens in our community where we keep a lot of things in bubbles, right? And this goes into an issue that Brandon Green put in the chat, and I'll have him further explain that. What I have seen at many different levels in leadership in our community is that they stick within their bubbles, stick within their community, their friends, their tight personal relationships, and they don't further reach out to those people that may have been affected. And that is a problem. Keeping this contained at one school when other kids at other schools may have had harm caused to them, it's not the way that should have been responded to, and something else should have been done on both our police level and also on our district level. It's a domino effect. When harm is caused, it doesn't just happen to one person, right? It happens to that person and anybody they're in close contact with, anybody that person may be in contact with, and so on and so on. I know on a personal level, my daughter did not go through the program, but she was very scared seeing police officers come onto the campus with firearms and not knowing exactly what was going on. She was very upset that her other friends were crying and upset about the issue. And I know that some neighbors and friends of mine didn't even know about the program and what was transpiring on campus that day until their family came home and let them know. So that is a great question, as Krista touched on, about everybody being involved and not just being tight-knit in one community. Everyone from the district that was involved to the police officers, everybody was responsible and should really communicate with our community. I am going to hand it over to Brandon for a quick, brief explanation of what he put on the chat, and then we'll wrap it up. Thank you.
Sure. I just wanted to elaborate on what Krista said, because this thing keeps, this sort of thing thematically keeps popping up. So some of us have participated in, you know, two of these conversations, two of these make the world a better place conversation. And these things like continue to pop up in terms of who has awareness, who does not have awareness, why do people not have awareness? And even that is sort of a manifestation of the way in which white supremacy operates. So generally speaking, I'm almost always one of the only Black men everywhere that I am as a lawyer. I was one of 3 Black men in my entire law school class. I've been the only Black lawyer everywhere that I've worked. So I have to know and understand how to interact with whiteness in a way that white folks don't have to know and understand how to interact with me. So I have to be hyper aware of the things that impact them, what they perceive as dangerous, what they perceive as professional, what they perceive as this, what they perceive as that. And they don't have to be aware of those things for me. So when I talk about, you know, the questions I used to ask my students, right? Like, I don't know many Black folks that have never been pulled over, like ever. But for years, I taught a clinic where like the vast majority of my students would say this, right? Like the idea that folks don't know or would not have any level of awareness about what it might look like for police to come to campus in riot gear. Like it feels like it's absurd on its face, right? Because like issues of police violence are not new, right? I was a kid when the viral videos of Rodney King were all over the place, right? There was riots, you know, my grandfather's neighborhood behind that. And so, you know, I think sometimes it's a little challenging for me to sort of grapple with and give folks grace for like a lack of knowledge, because these things are everywhere. And it's the same thing that happened when we organized with the Board of Supervisors around the 3%er stuff. It was like, oh, well, I didn't even know that sign meant that. Like, how is that possible? How is it possible that like law enforcement didn't know that 3%er signs were bad when law enforcement has anti-right wing like task force? But we have to know those things, right? Because we have to, like, when I was in law school, I did a spring break fellowship helping represent folks on death row. And anybody who's ever been close to like or gone through like a town that surrounds a prison knows what you begin to see once you enter that town, right? So like for Black folks, seeing once you enter a place where you see American flag, American flag, American flag, American flag, American flag, like, you know that that's generally a place that you don't really want to be, right? Because the American flag as a symbol, if you see it in every yard that you're passing, you can probably predict with the level of certainty what like the political leanings of that particular neighborhood, how you may or may not be treated, how you may or may not be suspected, right? So then when people say, well, the American flag is innocuous, like that's just not true, and everybody knows it, right? White folks have never had to have a book that told them where they could go, stay, et cetera, right? But Black folks had to have the green book, right? To be able to just travel through town. There were sundown towns, like all of these different things that we just have to know just for survival, like just to be able to get through. The same conversation happens every 2 or 3 years where it's like the conversation that Black folks and other folks of color have to have with their kids. And then there's always like this outcry from non-folks of color, like, wow, I can't believe that you have to have that conversation. Well, we've been talking about the conversation that we have to have forever, right? My grandfather had to have it with my uncle had to have it with his kids, my mom had to have it with me, I'm gonna have to have it with my kids, right? Like the idea that people don't know these things, I think sometimes comes across to me as like extremely intentional. And so because of that, it ends up making the advocacy a little bit hard, like what is it that we are actually organizing around. So when people are like, oh, you know, when Krista, which I think rightly says, like different people have these different views and these different experiences. Some people are like, oh, well, that just means I support the police. Like it's just fundamentally not true. And like very quick Googling would demonstrate that that's not true. right? And so like this idea that it's just like a difference of perspective, right? Like it, and not like real life experience, real life harm on the line, I think is a problem. And for me, we've seen this in all kinds of instances. Like we saw it with masks. Like I remember writing the superintendent and my kid's principal because I didn't want to send my kids back to school because COVID was disproportionately impacting Black kids, right? Like we had family members who died, and I was writing the school administration, like the messaging around COVID in schools is not at all dealing with the fact that this disproportionately impacting communities of color. Like nothing that you've all said about that is that the current messaging about returning back to mass doesn't do that. So there's always this thing where we always have to be like, our experience is like very different. And what you're writing right now, like does not at all take in consideration of that, right? Like my kids know that I have to go to a double funeral to bury my uncle and my cousin who both died from COVID, right? Like, and if that is my kids' reality, then this idea that they're gonna be in school with other kids who aren't wearing masks and then have the peer pressure of not wearing a mask, right? Like that does something to them. But we don't even have that conversation on like a super specific level about masks and that disproportionate impact. So of course, when we have a conversation about police, right? Like it's going to be absent that experience. And then we don't have any people in the halls of power that can even speak to that experience too. So then it becomes like a level of kind of like willful ignorance. But then we also have to be in the position to offer grace to people who should know better, right? Because we live in the information age. But people can still get away with being like, oh, I just didn't know, or is this an accident? Like the idea that the police chief won't issue a public statement and really take any responsibility. Like now, let's imagine that we had a Black police chief, right? And something happened that like was perceived by mostly like white parents and mostly white kids as something super harmful, right? What would be being asked of that police chief and their response to the community, right? But like in Benicia, there's a dearth of people of color and none of them have power. So the police chief can be like, I'm not gonna say nothing publicly, like deal with it. But if it was reversed, you just reverse the ethnicity of any of these people, the response looks extremely different. City council's having a very different conversation, right? And like, we can't even talk about those fundamental truths. It's very hard to think about like how we move forward. And I just wanted to put that out there because like, I admittedly have a very hard time when people are like, oh, I just didn't know. What you mean? Like Black folks disproportionately impacted by it. It could be all across the news, everywhere, plastered everywhere. People can still be like, I ain't know, because you don't have to, because the proximity to your experience is not that. And the people who are in power don't have that proximity either. And it's frustrating, like beyond like what I can actually articulate. But it makes sense that the superintendent didn't like really say anything notable. It makes sense that like nobody on city council has said anything notable. Like the police chief didn't say anything notable because it's not their experience. And they don't care enough about experiences outside of their own, right? To like fully see people not like themselves as like fully human and fully citizen and fully like insert thing, right? Like, and that's why that response ends up lacking the level of substance and humanity that you would hope that it does. And I don't know how we teach humanity to people who like so readily deny it to others. That is not positive at all.
Thank you so much, Brandon. I'm going to let Miss Rosalind speak, but I want to say that it's problematic. It seems like city officials and other leadership, as well as the police department, they tend to show up when things are going very well, when it's headlines, baseball games, when things are going well in the district, like different programs that are being very progressive, they show up, but they tend to retreat when something comes that it's going to be harmful and impactful and maybe stir up a little bit of dust. And I'm going to just say a comment was told to me at one of the city council meetings, after one of the city council meetings, where a local program that is helping Black children with education and portfolios and college acceptances, I was told in a comment that they were very surprised about the number of Black faces that were in the district meeting that night. And then I was asked if we all went to the same church. And that it's that level of willful ignorance and undercover racism that is a big problem in our community. And like someone else said, it's 2022 now. And if you're not going out and being proactive with educating yourself, then you have a lot of deep problems you need to deal with. Ms. Roslyn, would you like to help us wrap up?
To wrap up, and I'll be brief, and I'm very sorry that my camera isn't working. I'm a member of BBLM, a business owner, a longtime resident of Benicia, and an active volunteer in our education program, reading at a number of preschools, the Vallejo Project, and a couple of elementary schools here in Benicia. What I really want to emphasize here is parental empowerment. Parents are the primary and most powerful advocates of our children. The district, principals, school, the teachers, the police are all here to partner with us in educating and protecting our children. Please do not give your parental power away. Make sure your children are not involved in any program that you have not given your written permission for their participation. This definitely includes the DARE program, which we know is harmful to our children. Therefore, BBLM will be drafting and circulating a petition demanding the termination of the DARE program within the Benicia Unified School District within the near future. And possibly, we'd love also a call to action for the formation of a community group focusing on police accountability. Perhaps that could be an action item for the Cure Commission. My next and final thing is, all of us here on this call, the city of Benicia has an equity officer. As citizens, we should all ask that the city, the mayor, the city officials, and the police chief, what advice did that equity officer give? And how useful was that advice in repairing this horrific incident that happened here in Benicia? We want to thank you all for your time. I know everybody has lots they could be doing this Saturday afternoon, and we really appreciate you spending that time with us here at BBLM. Kashana, take us away.
Yes, just to follow up with what Ms. Ross said, we want to thank everybody for taking the time out, sitting with us, learning some things about the DARE program and the incident that happened. We want to thank our panelists, Mariana, Andreas, Krista, Brandon, with all of your thoughts, the education that was given. We thank you all for sharing this space with us, and we hope that we can all grow, and hopefully our community can grow with us with this new information. Well, not new information, with the information that has been given today. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, everyone.